Well, hello, good morning and welcome to our 6th Bath Life Business Surgery. I'm Greg and this is a session specifically trying to help employers and employees plot their way back to working again wherever the working environment is. In truth, we've sort of all been away too long. But what do we have to do to be compliant? Almost more so, what can we do to help reassure our teams that our workplaces will be safe? How does duty of care and safety audits apply to working from home, let alone in the office? What is reasonable for employers to ask and reasonable also for employees to eschew? How does working part-time during furlough work for both sides? What paper trail, analysis, documentation is required? What about holidays? Enforced, optional? And how about redundancies, which very sadly, many businesses, several at least, are having to contemplate at the very least. All this and much, much more will be covered in this Bath Life Business Surgery. And if anyone watching has a business service, has particular skills or expert insights that their business provides, and you think this platform might work for you, please do make contact. We can provide a forum which allows multiple Bath businesses to have access to this sort of information for free. These sessions are also recorded for YouTube, so they're a sort of enduring asset, so they can be referred to, but equally can be sliced and diced by the companies to put out key parts of information through their social media channels, on their websites and so on. Please do send through your questions using the Q&A button at the bottom. You can ask anonymously. Some of this will be pretty sensitive, so that is fairly likely, or in person if you wish, you can name your company. Please make sure that we know which it is, if it is anonymous or named, and we will take those. I'll ask multiple questions otherwise, but this is your chance. We all need that help. We all need this insight, and we have two experts with us today who are going to help us. So yeah, what we aim to do is to provide actionable insights. That's a slightly inappropriate expression when it comes to legal companies, but insights you can do something with. What do I need to know? What do I do now? What's the best way to do it? Whatever the area is, whether it's the legal aspects of return to work, whether it's technology aspects as we had last week with Data Sharp, or financial planning as we will come on to subsequently with Richardson Swift, and then also with Unividual as well. The Richardson Swift one is on July 20th, so next Monday. Prior to that, a few parish notices, if I may. There are now fewer than 50 days. It suddenly sounds reasonably close to us. Fewer than 50 days before Bath Life once more returns to rude health, to publishing, to chronicling all that is great about this city. And we really just cannot wait to get going again. Our first issue will be published on August 28th, just ahead of the bank holiday. And like all independent local businesses, we have been really, really touched by the support that the business community here in Bath has given us, as we are also trying to find our way back. We're all flesh and blood. We're all in the same storm, albeit in different boats, and all in need of buoying up. So thank you. We're also absolutely determined to play our part to the very full, celebrating the best of the city, promoting the businesses, galvanizing business thinking, such as today, providing help and insight, and maintaining a plausibly positive tone. That's been our approach, giving reassurance where we can about what is happening in Bath and why there are grounds for a degree of very qualified optimism about how trading might be. It will be tough, but ultimately, whatever it is, we've all simply just got to get on with it, one way or another. There is something very fundamental underpinning all of this, and it's about the concept of belief. What became the great crash of 2008 was initially deemed the credit crunch, credit derived from credere, meaning to believe. Because our value systems were threatened, very literally, we didn't know what anything was worth. Because of that, fundamental value plummeted as uncertainty ruled. And there's something similar happening here now. Because we simply do not know what trading will be like in Q4. We do not know whether anyone will buy our products and services, our dinners, and even our pints as they once used to. Because of that, it's really easy for us all to sit on our hands. I don't know, therefore I won't act. Dazzled, rabbits dazzled in the headlights of doubt. And yet, If we all sit back, then all of us will be affected. If we don't get out there, if we aren't seen, others won't be comforted by that sense of normality. Others will feel cautious about going into empty shops or restaurants or even offices. In short, if we don't buy, money won't flow through our economy. And that ultimately is in no one's interest. So instead, it's about enlightened self-interest, as so often as it tends to be. There's one other key area of Bath that needs urgent support, and that's our charities. Never has the need been greater for what they do, and never has the funding been more threatened. No events, virtually no charity shops, until very recently. One thing the Bath business community does each year to support charities is the Bath Bool. This year, we can't have the Bath Bool, you know that, we know the reasons why, but we are running this charity fundraiser called Bool Aid on July 30th. So when you get that email, or see the call out on social media, as you most assuredly will, please consider this. Without the support of businesses and enlightened, thoughtful individuals, our charities will continue not to be able to do anything like what they wish to do, let alone what they need to do to support the most vulnerable in our society. Please do come forward. It is the business community which is going to help power our charities in these times. In that vein, please do snap up one of the last few remaining places left on the Bath Life virtual wine tasting event. It's tomorrow night, it's July 14th, carefully chosen as Bastille Day, that celebration of the beginning, essentially, or key part of the French Revolution. Big day for France and for French national identity, hence us choosing it as the day, the very French boule. And we're partnering once more with Stony Street. Join us and do good drinking. There's a slogan for you. Right. Let's come on to where we are this morning, which is this session with Mogers Drewett. As mentioned, it will be available on YouTube. Please do ask your questions to make sure that you've got these insights. We'll be speaking with two leading players from Mogers Drewett this morning, and I'll bring them forward now. As I introduce you, if you could each come forward, please. So Sean McDonough, an employment specialist at Mogers Drewett, working with both employers and employees on all aspects of employment relationship, with a view to protecting employers against the risk of claims and offering advice and support should a dispute arise. Sean also provides training for clients on a wide variety of employment areas and HR matters to prevent potential problems occurring in the first place. And Lucy, good morning, Lucy.
Good morning.
Good morning, hello. Well, for those who may not know, Lucy, an employment and HR specialist, over 20 years experience in HR, including 9 years at director level for a further education college. Experience includes responsibility for HR across all functions, including resourcing, relations, reward and development at operational and strategic level. Good morning to you both. So how are you both doing?
Well, thanks, Greg. Yeah, good morning. Yeah, we're good.
You're coping with the vicissitudes of lockdown. I know that Mogers have largely continued to work throughout. So let's just talk about Mogers as a company, perhaps with you, Sean, as a member of the management team. Where are you up to on your own thinking? First of all, tell us how many people you have perhaps in Bath and other areas, and where are you up to on your planning for your company to come back into the office?
So we've got 3 offices, Bath, Sherborne and Wells. We've got about 80 people in total. The offices have been largely down to skeleton staff during the lockdown, and we are pretty close to being able to return with our COVID safe, COVID secure plans. So the majority of people still are working at home and doing that very successfully, and that's working really well. We're adopting a Team A, Team B approach from around the middle of this month to enable people to get back to the office if they wish, but I don't believe we're going to be rushing back because it's working so well remotely. Clients by appointment in the offices, we've started going out to see clients as requested, and that all seems to be working quite well. We have policies and procedures in place to deal with that, but yeah, so it's going pretty well in the circumstances.
And just on that point, for either of you, all these questions are essentially for either, I guess. When you say if they wish to return to the office, how much sort of freedom or volition is that? Is it a question of trying to marry up their needs with what's appropriate for the office? Or is it entirely on the employee side? So, you know, I don't want to go back just yet. I've got, you know, whatever the issues might be, or my preference is to work from home. Is it from their point of view or from yours?
It's a bit of both, really, Greg, and we're pretty lucky because we can allow that flexibility, and so there's no hard and fast rule yet about what's going to happen. So yeah, it's a bit of both, really.
I think we all picked up your intonation on the word "yet." What, when, and very roughly what might that be?
We don't know because you've mentioned the uncertainty, the continued uncertainty. One of the biggest challenges and it's nowhere near as big a challenge for us as it is for other sectors. It's trying to navigate that uncertainty, both from a workflow point of view and also where we're going to be in 2 weeks, 2 months from a virus point of view and that type of thing. So we're planning for the best. The business has worked really flexibly over the pandemic. We want to take advantage of those flexibilities and build them into our normal operating model. Certain teams may have less flexibility than others going forward. We're in the process of deciding, and we'll just see how it goes over the next few months.
And Lucy, some of the team, like all businesses, they may be feeling personally a little bit apprehensive about returning to work in the office at current times. Is that something that you've experienced?
Yeah, for some of our clients, that some of their employees have been concerned for various reasons, and those can range from their own personal circumstances. So they may have caring responsibilities. So they've got children of school age. Clearly, they haven't been able to send their children to school as normal, or they may have other caring responsibilities, or they may be concerned about the processes and measures that are being put in place in the workplace. So they want some reassurances. So if they do come back, how will they be protected?
Yeah, and I think that whole concept of reassurance right the way across the piece, whether as a consumer going into a bar or a restaurant or an employee going into an office, that's an intangible, but we'll come on to this about what what all businesses can do, what you would recommend to help aid that reassurance point. Let's start with the furlough scheme, which we've all got very used to, and I suspect us with Media Clash, everyone in business must be supremely grateful for. It has given at least a period of time, and may well be far more than that, to work out what we all wish to do. But Sean, just run through what has recently changed from an employer's point of view and is about to change, and what it means and what they need to be thinking as the scheme tapers, which it does now.
So the key change is that from the 1st of July, the furlough scheme now operates on a flexible basis. Flexible furlough scheme, which allows employees to work part-time whilst their employer continues to benefit from the furlough scheme, from the coronavirus job retention scheme grants that the government pay for the hours that they're still not working. So that's obviously a great thing, because during the period when there was no flexibility, lots of organisations were frustrated by the lack of flexibility in their workforce. It had to be either one or the other, completely out of work or in work. So that increased flexibility from the 1st of July is a good thing. Slightly on the negative side, you can't furlough anybody now who wasn't previously furloughed for 3 weeks prior to the 10th of June. For 3 weeks prior to the end of June, so they had to be on furlough as of the 10th of June. Yeah. You can still re-furlough somebody who was previously furloughed, no problem. The flexibility includes removing the previous 3 week minimum furlough period. That no longer is in place, provided you have a flexible furlough agreement in place with your employees. So as of the 1st of July, lots of organisations would have moved on to a flexible furlough agreement, which allows this flexibility to occur, and is a far simpler way of dealing with it.
Could I just break it there? So tell us what that new flexible furlough scheme means for a company. Is that a tacit, that it's explained that companies will be compliant with new government regulations and thereby able to have workers working part-time? or is it explicit, i.e. it needs to be a written document which is adhered to, signed up to and so on by all employees?
It's a written document, so you have to have the agreement in place with your employees that facilitates the ability to get them to work flexibly.
Yeah.
And you can either specify from day one what that flexible working pattern will be. So you'll work 2 days a week rather than 5 days a week, which is a nice clean example. Or you can have a rota system where you would notify them. You have to notify employees in writing of the hours that they're required to work if they change during the flexible furlough period. And you have to retain those records for 6 years. So if you have a rota system in place, you give them notice of what rota they're going to work, and that's how it would work.
And asking for a friend, as they say, by when does this new agreement need to be in place, and can it be backdated?
Needs to be in place before you take advantage of the flexibility. So it can't be backdated. So any existing furlough agreements would remain live during that period, and then you would replace them with the flexible scheme.
Right. And for those companies that have sort of grids of working about when people are due back on certain days and so on, and have shared and discussed the rationale for that, does that effectively account as the new flexible working scheme if it's communicated to all?
I don't think it would. I think there has to be an agreement in relation to the mechanism, not the specific hours, but I think the employee would have to agree with the employer that they're going to work flexibly. Right. Part-time.
Let's come out a little bit more on that part-time point. Are there any minima? What is, and we'll come on to the tracking of it subsequently, but if you wanted someone to do, I don't know, half hour's piece of work on something, an hour, a morning, whatever, what is the minimum that is permittable? There isn't
a minimum. So you could, if you wanted to suffer the administrative headache, you could get somebody in to do an hour's work, and then they would be, well, they wouldn't be re-furloughed. They would just go back they would just continue to be flexibly furloughed. So yes, it works that way. Previously, you get them in for an hour and then they have to be re-furloughed for 3 weeks before you get them to work again, but that's not the case now. So there's no minimum. They could work an hour a week, 4 days a week. It's up to the needs of the employer.
And Lucy, both from the employers but also employees' point of view, how do you think that will work in practice about the on-off type of approach, and how should an employer approach their employees on that basis?
So for some, this might be quite beneficial. So I mentioned earlier, some people perhaps not wanting to come back because they've got childcare responsibilities, but they may be able to find some arrangements for part of the week, perhaps for childcare, so they'll be able to come to work for some of the week. It's also beneficial, particularly for those who have been on furlough for many, many weeks, as part of a reinduction to the workplace. So getting used to being back, doing the work again, maybe picking up new skills or retraining in certain areas. So it's quite useful for a lot of people.
Thanks. And one of the obligations, I guess, that an employer has is some sort of paper trail, record, whatever. How assiduous does that need to be? How detailed? Does that need to be, for example, signed off, like a timesheet between the employee and the employer? Or is it a simple spreadsheet of hours, or what? What is actually needed in practice from HMRC's point of view?
Well, as far as I'm aware, there's very little details being released about the actual audit requirements that we are all going to be subjected to once this is over. So the easy answer is as detailed a set of records as you can, but timesheets, diaries, those types of things would be, rotas, written rotas that are communicated within your organization. That type of detail will be useful in the event of an audit. The way the claims work from the 1st of July are different to how they used to work as well. There's a 10-step, believe it or not, a 10-step process you have to go through to submit your claim. It's really, really complicated.
Actually, on that, sorry, could you just perhaps briefly compare and contrast the old scheme with the new scheme? What are the different requirements?
I knew you were going to ask that, Greg, but it's you have to work out their normal working hours, what they've actually worked, what the furlough grant is, and make an application. That's it in a summary. the Treasury direction contains lots of formulas for doing those things, which I'd be lying if I said I could discuss with you here. But prior to the flexible scheme coming into place, it was just, there's our payroll. We're having 80% of that. Thank you very much. And there's a list of names who are on it. So it's much more complicated now.
And is there, I mean, again, appreciate that you can't give the precise steer because you haven't got the information because the government hasn't outlined it. But do you think it's fair to say blah, 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 worked half a day that week and 2 days that week and that's it? And thereby the claim is for, those 2.5 days minus what they currently work minus those 2.5 days? Or would it need to say half a day working on X, Y, Z, 2 days working on X, Y, Z, and actually detail the nature of the work? Is that needed?
I think initially the audit, because you're required to retain records of the hours that you notify your employees that they're required to work. So in the event, the first review at audit level, if you have a written paper trail in place demonstrating that Lucy was asked to work half a day or I was asked to work 2 days, and that work was undertaken, that should be enough. But the revenue being what they are, they may well ask for additional information to support that. Most organisations would have that. I have one client who is a sales business and they are keeping their rotas and their salespeople's diaries in one so they can demonstrate the activity behind the requirement in the event they need to. So that type of process.
And what about such things as the out of office? When someone's furloughed, that's quite clear. You stick a message up, currently furloughed, come back when I do, etc. But this is on, off, on, off. Should you be changing your out of office each time? I know it's a very specific point, but I'm interested.
Yeah, I think you should, because I think, the short answer is yes, you should be managing that to be able, because partly your employer will need you to. But yeah, I think it would be useful to be able to do that, to demonstrate when you have been working, when you haven't been working.
Any idea at all about how the government is going to monitor this, or indeed if they will?
They say they will, and there's lots of talk of audits, and they've increased the audit time. In the initial Treasury direction, I think it said 5 years, retain records for 5 years, and I'm saying 6 years. Whether the revenue will ever have the resources to be able to monitor it and audit it properly, I don't know. But there is lots of talk of auditing, and there's lots of anti-fraud mechanisms built into the regulations.
Has in any way the concept of what is permissible in terms of working changed now under this more flexible furlough approach than previously? For example, because we're all familiar with the idea of lockdown being eased and it's being gradual and so on, we're all getting sort of more relaxed about it. Has the concept of work changed in any way over what it was previously? What's allowed, what's not?
Specifically for the furlough scheme or generally?
Furlough scheme.
No, there's been no statutory redefinition of what work is versus what work isn't. But there's obviously huge amounts of flexibility in the way people are working and are performing their jobs at the moment. Right.
I'd like to bring in Nathan Baranowski of Ojo Solutions, if Nathan is there, and by the magic of technology. Nathan, as a good technologist, is I'm sure going to be able to step forward with alacrity and other things. You've got that lovely backdrop again, Nathan. Good morning.
Good morning.
Hi, Nathan.
Good morning.
In picture.
Yeah. You have a question about that's related to the furlough scheme. If you'd like to ask, please.
Yeah. So last week I was reading in the news, and my question is really one of rumor versus reality, which was that the suggestion that the changes in the terminology in the flexible furlough scheme are resulting potentially in the government able to make claims to people who could make people redundant at the end of the scheme and ask for the money back, rather than actually what the current wording is that suggests that it's your choice at the end what happens. And I just wonder if you had a view on that, whether it was rumour or is a potential risk for businesses to be aware of.
Okay, thanks, Nathan. So the short answer is yes, I think it's rumour. The slightly longer answer is around the weekend of the 25th of June, employment lawyers nationally had sort of coronary attacks because they'd all been advising their clients that they could make redundancies during and at the end of the furlough period. And then I think there was a Telegraph article that picked up on the wording in the new Treasury direction. But it's settled down now, and the prevailing view is that the wording which says continued employment means paying notice periods during the furlough period. So you can't pay in lieu of notice. You can't use furlough money to pay in lieu of notice, and you can't use furlough monies to pay redundancy payments, but you can use them to exhaust somebody's notice period during or at the end of the furlough period. So our view is that that's a rumour. And I was looking at something this morning. The Revenue have informally clarified it, and now the bonus, the £1,000 bonus per head of employee who is retained, has come in. So it's even clearer, I think, that the intention of the furlough scheme is different to that. So I would be relaxed about it.
Thanks. Good. Nathan, do you have a follow-up here whilst you're on?
I just really just to, I guess, clarify then. So during the scheme, my understanding is that one can put someone at risk at this moment in time, and they could be notified of that and maintain that risk position subject to any change at the end of the period. But you have to pay the full notice amount. That's right, in terms of that period. But you can still claim the furlough during that notice period.
You have to pay depending on what type of employment they have. So if they're a sort of salaried member of staff versus a sort of, not salaried and work irregular hours. If it's salaried, which is nice and easy as an example, yes, it's their normal rate of pay, but you can claim whatever the furlough grant is available at that time, and it's coming down over the course of the next couple of months. So it's 80% now, 70, 60 to August, September, October. So you can still get that grant to go towards your liability for notice payments.
If I could ask all three of you, so including you, Nathan, this time, one of the latest points is this idea of the £1,000 sort of bonus, grant, whatever, reward almost, that Sean just touched on, the end of January for people who are not made redundant. Do you think that's going to have any material impact, or indeed any impact, on how businesses think about their employees and potential redundancy?
I'll go first, Greg. I don't think it will. For most reasonable sized SMEs, I don't think it will. Because I would have thought the majority of those types of businesses, if they return all of their furloughed employees, they might be in for a payment of £30,000-40,000, which probably goes towards 1.5 salaries for the coming period. So I wouldn't have thought it's going to be a massive incentive. But if your business is stable and you're happy to bring people back in the ordinary course of events, then it's a windfall. Although I read yesterday Primark aren't going to apply for it. So because they don't think it's right that because their business is okay, they're not going to apply for the grant. And I've also heard other brands voluntarily repaying furlough monies over the last few weeks. So I would imagine most SME businesses will apply for the grant, but I don't think it will hold people off from making redundancies. That's my view. But
Nathan or Lucy?
No, I agree with Sean. I think January is still some way away, isn't it? So you've got to be able to retain those employees for another 5-6 months, which for some businesses may not be sustainable. Yeah. So depends on the reasons for reducing your headcount.
Yeah, and Nathan, in asking that, I'm not asking about Ojo and you personally. Yeah. Your general view of other similar sized businesses and so on. Does the grant make enough of a difference, or any difference?
I don't think it will make a difference to us in our situation, but even I think for most businesses, it's not really going to make that much of a difference. I think perhaps if you're in hospitality, I could see the benefit there of actually you're coming back and you're trying to claw back, and actually you've got massive losses, so it's going to help to recover from that. But yeah, it's not. It kind of just feels like I don't know, free money for no purpose, really. I think it's in the camp of why claim it.
Well, if we all saw it as like a changed taxation, it would be wholly uncontroversial. We'd gain a point of of corporation tax or some such, and it's almost the same way. It's money coming back to businesses. It sounds from our conversations and so on. It sounds as though it's not going to have any impact at all on employment, because it's so minor. £1,000 is nice, but you're not going to change anything for that.
Yeah.
Okay, Nathan, thank you very much for your questions.
Thanks, Nathan.
A couple of things. All the very best as you're plotting your way back as well. And also, Odo are a very good example of a company which has stepped up civically and been a great supporter of the Bath Pool. So good for you, even though you just disappeared at that moment. But thank you, Nathan. Let's come on to holidays and furlough. We've touched on this previously at the earlier session we had. We've seen some eons ago. Just to absolutely clarify what happens to holiday which is accrued during furlough, and whether or not companies can insist that people have effectively taken holidays during this time, even if they're part-time working as well.
Yeah, so holiday accrues as normal during furlough and can be taken as normal unless you have a different agreement in place with your employees. So I say agreement, but it's not strictly speaking an agreement. You can give notices under the Working Time Directive to require employees or to prevent employees from taking holidays at certain times. So the rules haven't really changed. Lots of employers have exercised the ability to say don't take holidays yet or do take holidays now. There was some doubt at the outset whether you could take holiday during the lockdown. But since the lockdown was eased, that's all gone away. And now, unless you're extremely vulnerable still and can't enjoy any of that relaxation of the lockdown, the vast majority of people can still take their holiday as they normally would. There's been a slight change I say slight change, it's quite a significant change. A certain amount of holiday. In the UK, we are entitled to 5.6 weeks holiday, minimum holiday each year. 4 weeks of that is derived under European legislation, and up until the beginning of the crisis, that could only roll forward into the next year in very specific circumstances. There's been a change that said that can now roll forward to the next 2 holiday years. But other than that, it's still pretty much the same. Holiday pay, if an employee takes holiday pay whilst they're furloughed, they're entitled to their normal rate of pay, but you can claim back the bit of the furlough pay. But that's pretty much it, Luce, isn't it? Nothing else.
That's right. I think from a practical point of view, I think early on, a lot of people weren't taking holiday because of the lockdown. Yeah. I'm seeing now with my clients many more employees requesting holiday, just to have some time off and time away from their laptop. So I think for many of our clients, it's not become necessary at the moment to request staff to take the holiday because it's happening naturally anyway.
Yeah.
And on this this point about, we all know that September to December is going to be a crucial period for many businesses, particularly for those who happen to have a magazine called Bath Life coming back on August the 28th. Thought I'd just slip that in there. But for that period, it is vital. Are you, as an employer, permitted to say, I'm sorry, no, you're not allowed to take holiday during that period. We need you working?
Yes, you are. You can. Yeah. You obviously have to weigh that up against the downside of holiday accruing. And I don't know when, one's holiday year might end, but you might end up carrying forward holiday and you don't need to. So in principle, yes, you can control that, but it has other knock-on effects.
And Lucy, from a morale and relationship with teams point of view, of course it can't be a diktat. If I know companies are pursuing that line, if it is done that way, it presumably has to be done through assumptive consultation, to use a made-up term, something like that.
So there has to be communication, obviously, with your employees about what you are letting them and not letting them do. And the earlier on you can do that, the better, so that people are forewarned about what to expect. Yeah, but like Sean says, a balance between letting them have the holiday now or potentially carrying it over with some potential costs later.
Yeah. Let's come on to the back to work planning. And of course, in saying this, many businesses such as your own have been continuously in business during this period. But I'm talking about back to work really in a sort of proxy for the office, about the steps back to that degree of something approaching 9 to 5 in a building type of normality, for want of a strange word. What are the key steps, maybe for you, Lucy, the key steps that employers should be thinking about right now to help guide their businesses back and to reassure their teams?
Yeah, Sure. So obviously employers have a duty of care to all their employees regarding their health, safety and welfare. So one of the really important things that needs to happen is employers develop risk assessments and look at the risks that may be posed in employees coming back to the workplace, and then identifying some control measures that they could put in place to minimise or mitigate against any of those risks. And those are key pieces of documentation that need to be retained by employers for at least 7 years, because the HSE may require some information from you at any given point. So
HSE being the Health and
Health
Safety.
and Safety Executive. Yeah, so it's really important that everything's documented, and excuse me, the types of control measures that you might be able to put in place could be from things that, in terms of what you communicate to your staff, what you've said about the measures that will be in place, reminding everyone about good hygiene practices, increasing the cleaning services that you have in your workplaces, providing some personal protective equipment, so minimum maybe some antibacterial, hand sanitizer, some wipes, those sorts of things, and also thinking about balancing those that do need to return to the office with those who can continue working from home, as Sean mentioned earlier. So there's so many things that could be done. It needs to be a thorough analysis of your own workplace, including things around how people get there. How do they travel? Is that going to pose a risk to them? How do they access the building? Particularly if you share a building with other companies, what arrangements being made for communal areas, things like that, what signage, what markings, thinking about the guidance and instructions you might give to employees. One really good tip I've heard, and we're implementing it at Mogers Drewett, is to do a short video showing your staff what the office is going to look like before they return. So everybody's familiar with the entrances and exits, and all the hand sanitizer stations or markings, desk layouts, those sorts of things before they actually return.
What about just very, the more minutiae, the more sort of absurd in some ways it sounds, but what about things like going up and down stairs? Stairwells typically are not, staircases, not particularly wide. You couldn't really pass each other and so on. I heard one company talking about they almost want to have their teams starting at different times to minimise the up and down stairs-ness of it.
Yeah, absolutely.
Is that sensible, needed?
Yeah, I think that is sensible. Not only about using stairwells or lifts if they're available, but also car parks. So having a staggering start and finish time, so people are coming and going, just getting in and out of their cars is quite a sensible idea. We're having, as Sean mentioned, Team A, Team B rotas as well. So we're halving the office staff, so that not everybody's in at the same time, as well as having some staggered starts and finishes.
And a little bit further on communal areas, or so for example, dare I ask about toilets? So there, aside from the obvious hygiene issues, are there any practical steps where, well, you might suggest about how toilets might be differently used?
I think the one thing to consider is trying to minimise any queues for toilets, because you don't want a big line of people who can't socially distance themselves outside the toilet. So having some sort of arrangement to know when the facilities are engaged or not would be quite helpful. And just increasing the cleaning services. So if you have a cleaner up to now in once a day, maybe looking at them coming in twice, 3 times a day, particularly for those sorts of areas, or the high frequency touch points like door handles, switches, those sorts of things as well.
Yeah. And presumably much the same for communal rooms, team rooms and so on. I mean, many businesses, for example, in hospitality or hair and beauty and so on, will have team rooms where people rest prior to going out front of the house and so on. Presumably every single aspect this needs to be
absolutely
through.
Yeah, absolutely. So the things you'll need to consider are around social distancing, whether there's any equipment that requires some special training or personal protective equipment that might need to be used. You'll need to think, as I said, about people coming in, how easy can they access the office again. And also, don't forget, as we mentioned before, about the people who have caring responsibilities who still need to stay at home, or those who are vulnerable or extremely vulnerable. they all need to be considered as well as part of your risk assessment.
Yeah. If I could just interrupt this part of it and revert to where we were on holidays. Had a note from Jane Campbell-Howard at the very mighty Society Cafe. Very good to see you back, as well as the other cafes. She asked, in the furlough agreements we had with our employees back in March, we specifically stated that holidays would not be accrued, and they all signed this. So where do they stand now as a company?
Yeah, hi Jane, thanks for that. Firstly, love the Society Cafe, so delighted to see you guys back and up and running. I don't think it works, is the short answer. If your holiday is enhanced over and above statutory holidays, which is the over and above 28 days that we talked about a minute ago, you may, depending on how your furlough agreement was drafted, it may be that you can freeze contractual holiday accrual during the period, but it won't work as to prevent statutory holiday accruing, because that's done from a statutory point of view, and it's not affected by your furlough agreement. So your holidays will have accrued during that period.
And if I may say to Jane and to others, if there are yet more specific follow-ups, I'm sure either of you would be delighted to take those. We'll include then the email which goes out subsequently. But thank you, Jane. Thank you for that. Let's come back to that, the sort of physical planning into duty of care and so on. I just wondered, Lucy, in your experience with all your different clients, is the planning assumptions, are they different in different cities? For example, some of your London clients face different concerns.
Yeah, absolutely. London is quite unique, as we know that sort of was quite had quite a high rate of infection at the beginning. There's still some uncertainty around how people can get to offices and things like that. So obviously public transport is the main form of travel for many people going into the city. And at the moment there is reduced capacity on public transport. So that's the first barrier most employers are going to have to overcome. And clients in London, purely on the basis of that, have decided not to return to offices at the moment, because it's just not safe enough in their eyes for their employees to return. The second barrier that may come against is around access to buildings, because often you share a building with other companies, and it's ensuring that landlords of those buildings have put the right measures in place for the communal areas before you actually return. So it'd be advisable to speak to landlords of those buildings to get some information from them about what measures they've put in place in order to help you make the best decision for your company.
Just on that point, quite timely, Caroline Curran has said it's directly related. If you're in a serviced office, or indeed a multi-tenancy type of building, when there are many of those in Bath, but the landlords are not being forthcoming with extra cleaning of communal areas, what do we as tenants, do we have any rights in that respect? And how would you advise them as tenants to pursue those rights? Obviously communication and discussion, but if a landlord says no, whatever, how should they respond?
I think ultimately it's, the landlord has a health and safety obligation towards the tenants in the same way that we all do in all those different networks. If ultimately the landlord has decided, acting reasonably, etc., that they have adequate cleaning services for those communal areas, the tenant, I'm not sure whether they have rights arising under the lease. We need to look at that on a case-by-case basis, but they could speak to the health and safety executive about it, which might give some sort of redress, but that's quite a dramatic step to take.
It's going YouTube, really, isn't it?
It is a bit, yeah. So I think it's kind of it's the same conversation in a different setting that employers are going to be having with their employees. So landlords and tenants, employees, your environment is safe for the following reasons. If they're not going through that step, which I think the point Caroline's making is a landlord that doesn't appear to be, there's extra cleaning of communal areas. So whether they have said they think that's sufficient or they haven't responded at all. But I think keep pressing, and if they don't respond, tell them you're going to speak to the health and safety executive to get some guidance from them to feed back to them, and I suspect they will then respond. So
this might be a little bit benign, but it may well be, and I'm not talking about that specific case. It may well be that certain landlords just have not got round to this. They haven't thought about it. They're not expecting things to be used. They haven't, or they have a plan, they haven't communicated it. But
it could be that.
Do that is the message here. And you, as a tenant or whatever, Caroline, you absolutely have the right to raise it and to threaten to escalate it to a higher authority. One would think common sense would prevail.
You would hope so.
I'd hope so, as ever. And keep it out of the hands of the lawyers thereby. No, not at all. That's more than anything. Tell us about, Lucy, perhaps other issues. You touched on childcare planning, school opening, perhaps also into shielding. From an employee's point of view, an employer might say, look, we need you all backfiring on XX date. How does it work now compared with ordinary times in your ability to say, look, I'm sorry, I'm not able to and I don't wish to go back to work just yet, certainly not physically?
Yeah, I think at the moment it's about talking to your staff about the situation, because there are some things at the moment that are beyond our control. So the caring responsibilities, whether that's caring for a young person or an older person, that's out of our control. There are no other ways around that that I can think of at the moment. If you're dependent on nurseries or private childminders, there are some that are starting to open up now, but then it's going to come down to capacity. Can you get a space? And equally, people looking after your children or whoever as well is an issue. So I think it's very much at the moment about communicating with those employees. If they've been working from home up to now, talk about how that can work in the future, and just keeping the lines of communication open. Obviously, people who are vulnerable, extremely vulnerable, those all have to be taken into account as part of your risk assessments. For those who are vulnerable, you may be able to mitigate against risk for them. So they may be happier to return to work on that basis. So it's, like I say, it's all about talking to people.
And presumably the same principle applies with companies who, perhaps with salespeople, would typically have people visiting clients, or indeed yourselves as lawyers, that again, if the individual doesn't wish to do that, they feel that any exposure increases risk of contagion. That is a dialogue. One can't insist as an employer, nor should one, but at the same time, you need business to be done.
So.
Yeah, I think depending on the steps that have been taken, and Lucy will roll her eyes now because she's nice about stuff, but depending on the steps that you've taken as a business and your clients have taken, I think you could require it, but I don't think we should be requiring it yet. So I think that would be the slight distinction I draw there. It's all about the level of risk, which lots of these issues, Greg, will I think will fade away over the course of the next 4 to 6 weeks. But either there'll be something dramatic will happen with the virus, or all of this risk will fade away. And I think we will all probably end up in the position at the end of the summer where the majority of our staff are quite relaxed about coming back to work and going to see clients and those types of things, provided everything keeps going in the direction it's going in at the moment.
I think there's a more general point there, which we found as well with business, that that which we think now is not what we'll be thinking in 4-6 weeks' time. We're all sort of looking over our shoulders at the most recent things that have been happening, as opposed to, well, actually, each is a step, but we are getting a step towards something. I'm trying to avoid the word normal because it isn't normal, but at least familiar, perhaps.
Absolutely, yeah.
We've had a question from Christopher Silver of LPV. What are the bare legal minimum and recommended minimum provisions any business must make if their operations generally include clientele entering and or staying on the premises? He's talking shops, pubs, hotels and so on. But I think it really applies to any. If you've got people visiting your place of work, is there a separate and additional duty of care to them as opposed to the existing team?
I think So clients coming to your clients or customers coming to your building,
Yes.
or your hotel or your theatre or wherever the case may be.
Yeah.
So I think broadly, and the answer to that is potentially quite detailed depending on what the business and what the sector is. Broadly, the same duty applies to whether you're dealing with your employees or your customers or your clients, guests, diners, whatever the case may be. We all have to comply with the same duty to ensure health and safety is maintained. The specifics are going to vary on a case-by-case basis. Greg, so the lawyer in me finds that quite difficult to answer. So
it's come a different way around. Is there a single source or a few sources you could point us to for a very sensible checklist for businesses? Make sure you do the following. Ding, ding, ding. Do you even have one as a Mogers white paper? I'd have thought would be quite useful on this. What do you need to do? Because in our case, we've looked around. There's multiple different sources of information that overlap, but there doesn't seem to be approaching a single authority on this.
No, I think fundamentally it's the government's guidance. Initially, you should look at, but then follow it up by looking at the Health and Safety Executive's guidance too. And there will be sector-specific guidance out there also, but similar to what Sean's saying, it's going to be very specific to your company, wherever you work, whoever you work with, that will inform what your risk assessment says. But there is guidance out there, and I think it's useful to look at a range of guidance to make sure you are covering everything you need to cover.
Yeah. Let's come on to.
Sorry, Greg, before you go on, I know some of our clients have been taught. You were involved in a long insurance call last week, Lucy, weren't you?
Yeah, insurers. Yeah, that's true. Insurers are a good source of information as well. So if you get in touch with your insurers, they should be able to give you some guidance on or some sort of assessment of your own risk assessment. So they'll give you an overview of what you've included and where they might suggest further recommendations.
It's a good advice. Check with your insurers, of course. That's usually good advice in all times, but certainly government website and the HSSE. I want to come on to a specific, which is along these lines, that we all have our own personal thresholds. We all have our, at the margins, some different interpretations about what social distancing is, and we probably all looked at others and thought, come on, that's it's not wholly appropriate. But what happens in this instance? A colleague comes in and brags about having wild weekends, or clearly flouting all the social distancing rules and so on. What are their fellow employees' rights? Are they able to say, look, I'm really uncomfortable being around this person, because after a while I now know they do. How should the company respond?
From Lucy's point of view, Lucy will say it's about communication and making sure people are aware of what their responsibilities and all the rest of it. And that's part of my response as well, because that's the first stage, is talking to your staff so everybody's aware of what you're trying to achieve, what they should and shouldn't be doing, and following the guidance. Because employees have obligations towards their employers as well, and to their colleagues. So if you do have an employee who is spending the weekend on Bournemouth Beach or doing whatever it might be doing, ultimately, if they're flouting social distancing guidance and you can demonstrate that, then that could be a misconduct issue. And that's how you would ultimately sanction it, I think. But we all need to be talking to our staff about that, because the new normal that we're going to get to, there are going to be all sorts of different people who want to do different things. But I think we need to encourage people to behave sensibly. And I know if you read certain papers, there's no evidence really that people are behaving sensibly. But I know most of the people who work for our firm do. So yeah, we're going to be talking and talking about those things internally.
At least none of us would wish to, it's not a question of snitching, but if you're uncomfortable with being near someone who's done that sort of thing, how would you, beyond communicating, what would you suggest, either for the employee or for the employer?
Well, first of all, I think it's about ensuring in your risk assessments you've done everything you can to mitigate against any transfer, of virus or whatever. So the whole social distancing rules are there for that reason, to try and mitigate against anything being transferred. So I think first and foremost is making sure that those are as robust as possible to avoid anything happening in the future. When it comes down to staff doing things in their private lives, like Sean says, we first and foremost tell people what you expect and what the consequence of those things happening are, but also looking at why, perhaps talking to people about if they have any concerns, to come to their line manager and talk about it, or come to HR if you have an HR department. It's going to be a bit of a joint effort, I think, at the moment, and people shouldn't be afraid of speaking up if they have a concern, because it's important that employers try and alleviate those as much as possible.
Yeah, talking of alleviate as much as possible. What about working from home, the duty of care that an employer has, whether physically or even mentally, of course, as well? What about that risk assessment? In an office, there are probably things called desks and computers and chairs and whatever. At home, it could be cross-legged with a laptop sitting on a bed, sort of thing. What is the duty of care? How does risk assessment work in that circumstance?
Well, the duty of care also that you have for your employees in the workplace also extends to when they're working at home. So things that you can do are display screen equipment, DSE risk assessment, so you can get people to self-assess how their offices are set up or how their workspace is set up, check to see if they need any special equipment. In some cases, some of my clients have arranged for their employees to have desks or chairs sent home, or laptop tables, keyboards, those sorts of things, to help make their work environment as comfortable as possible. Because as I said, you do have a duty of care. Other things you probably should be looking at are around lone working sort of arrangements. So if people are at home working by themselves, have they got a way to stay in contact with you? Has all that communication been put in place? And then the other thing to be mindful of, particularly this current moment, is around stress and mental health, working from home, and the sort of pressures that can add onto people as well.
I mean, I fear this might sound very simplistic, but how, as an employer, could you attempt to assess or help with any potential mental health issues to someone working from home? What do you do?
Again, I sound like a broken record, but it's all about communicating and being open and honest with your staff, creating that culture where people can come forward with any concerns that they have. It might be about offering some tips and techniques to everybody about managing your own mental health when you're working from home in particular. It might be offering things like access to counselling services or employee assistance programs, those sorts of things. It's about being reasonable in these situations, but just keeping in touch, being in contact, and creating an open culture.
Being reasonable, keeping in contact, creating an open culture, these are all, I'm sure, very, very sensible pieces of advice in these current times. There is a legal framework in which everyone has to operate, which perhaps Sean has outlined, but ultimately it is about the fairness and reasonableness which is shone through in today's discussion. We're going to close at this point, and our thanks to Mogers Drewett today, to Sean and to Lucy. Thank you.
Thanks, Greg.
Thank you for your time and your questions today as well. It's been a very engaged audience, and I don't doubt there'll be strong figures on YouTube for this. Please look out for our next Bath Life Business Clubs and our surgeries, and our next virtual wine tasting, which is just tomorrow night, raising money for the Bath Pool. Look out also, of course, for Pool Aid itself on July 30th. If your company has professional services that would be relevant and useful for people in current times, please let's talk, because we could all do with help navigating here. This has been a Media Clash production, and this has been the 6th Bath Life Business Surgery. Thank you. Bath together. Thanks.
Thanks, Greg.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.